Hello friends and welcome back to another episode. So today I would like to talk about TLRs, twin lens reflex cameras. Okay, and it's quite literal. The T, twin lens, it means two lenses. SLR is single lens, right, one, and these are twin lenses. So the top lens is where you acquire focus. You're looking down through I'll show you how it works basically. You raise the hood and then there's a focus screen down there and you have a little magnifier. I don't know if you can see the magnifier, but you look down through the magnifier and you acquire your focus and you take the shot. Okay, that's basically the nuts and bolts. Very simple, of course. It's just a surface description of how a TLR works. It's just really cool. It's kind of a hipster thing. It's an old school throwback thing. Okay, so we have a lot to cover, and this is actually my second take. I did the first take and I went way too long, so I'm trying to do the second take and really cut some stuff out. Okay, so these are all 6x6. Every one of these TLRs is 6x6. So 120 film. I think it's 72 centimeters long or something like that. Anyway, so it's kind of universal depending on what format camera you're using. But these are all medium format, but they can be 6x4.5, 6x6, 6x7, 6x8, 6x9, and there's some even very long panoramic versions. But these are all 6x6 in the classic Richard Avedon. I love Avedon's portraiture. And he did 6x6. He did these types of cameras, the 1:1 aspect ratio, because 6x6 is literally 1:1, 1:1. For every dimension in the X, it's the same dimension in the Y, 1:1. Okay, and again, it's 120 film, 6x6 centimeter. Okay. Now let's cover the focus screen. So these cameras, let me tell you what I have here. First of all, I have a Graflex 22, Rolleiflex 3.5F, Rolleicord VA Type 2, Flexret Model 6, Yashica Mat 124G, and the Mamiya C220F. These cameras are from the 50s and 60s. This camera's from 84, and this camera's from the early 90s. Okay, so we have everything from pre-1959, this camera's from 59, and this camera's from the 1990s. So focusing screen is going to be your biggest inhibitor to good photographs, because here's what happens. The focus screens in there, they patina, just like a human eyeball. Old people get cataracts over their eyes, right? It's like a patina over the eye. And these cameras get the same thing in their glass. And the ground glass or the Fresnel lens, they get old and the glass literally patinas and it becomes milky and hazy and you can no longer see through it. It's very difficult to acquire focus, especially indoors. Now indoors it's super difficult. If you get into the bright outdoors, it's not as difficult, but indoors it's almost impossible to acquire focus. Therefore you need a new focus screen. So I'm introducing here, I didn't put his name up here. There's a gentleman named Rick Olsen. There's an E in there, O-L-E-S-E-N, but he pronounces it Olsen, 2 syllables. You can just Google him. But he sells replacement screens for the Rolly. Now some of these you can get, they're $300 just for the replacement screen, okay? But his are $80, and it's quite a value. I replaced mine on my own, no specialized tools. I removed the hood, took out the old focus screen, put the new focus screen in, and reinstalled the hood. Everything was good to go for $80. And now this screen, it's like it's brand new, and I can pick up anything. The glass is so clear, and that's why I'm kind of elated, because now I can use the camera. Before I literally could not use the camera. This is a $1,200 camera. Couldn't even use it because I couldn't acquire focus on anything. Now I pick up focus instantly with the new glass for $80. Okay, so my point in that was, when you get into these older cameras, these 1950s and 60s cameras, there's almost going to be guaranteed that the glass is going to be very dim and very patinaed, and you're going to have difficulty acquiring focus. So you might want to consider that and go with one of the newer cameras, just to avoid that. You'll get a bright focus screen and you'll have a nice coated lens. These newer cameras have coated lenses, and some of these older cameras are so old that the lenses really aren't coated. And if they are, it's a very antique, primitive coating, and it's very easy to flare the lens, right? And you blow out your image because the sun hit the lens and blew out your image, okay? focus knob. So this is an argument again. This is kind of like flame war bait in the bulletin boards. Okay, so you can see here the Rolly 3.5F has the crank wheel, and the Rolly Cord has the knob. It's just a knob. Now the purist will say, and the Yashica Mat is the only other one of the 6 that has the crank wheel, the crank knob. Now the purist will say it's not a camera, it's not a TLR unless it has the crank. And I don't like the crank, and I'll tell you why I don't like the crank. I prefer the knob because of the tactile feedback through the camera. So I liken it to a cheater pipe. If you're trying to break a nut or a bolt and it's old and it's rusted, you put a ratchet on there and you can't get enough torque, and you take a section of pipe and you put it on the ratchet and you break the torque on the bolt with this section of cheater pipe because it gives you more leverage. Well, it's the same thing with these cameras, but you don't need it. And it can actually be dangerous because what happens, a lot of times you'll notice in these TLRs, it's very easy to put the take-up spool. So the full roll goes on the bottom of the camera, and the empty one goes on the top. That's the take-up spool. It's easy in these TLRs to put it in slightly crooked, so it's not true. It's on a slight angle. And what happens is after 2, 3, 4, 5 images, the film will start to bind on you, right? And the problem is if you have the crank lever, you can muscle past it, right? And without even knowing it, you can damage some of the internals of the camera because you over-torqued it, right? But if you have a knob, the focus knob, the tactile feedback is very precise. And if that take-up spool is on a slant, you'll get that tactile feedback through the knob, and it's going to tell you, hey, something is not right internally. You might not want to force the wheel. Don't force it. Just stop where you are. Even if you're going to ruin the batch of film, open the back of the camera and figure out what's wrong. And it's going to save you hundreds of dollars. I would rather waste one roll of film than damage something internally on the camera. So I prefer the knob as opposed to the crank, okay? And that's called the Film Advance. The Film Advance knob or the Film Advance crank or whatever, lever. We covered spools, light meter. Now some of these cameras have light meters, internal light meters, and some don't. I prefer the ones that do not because I have a Sekonic L308 that I use for all my photography, indoor, outdoor. I get a light meter reading, and then I set my controls accordingly, okay? So I've never really been too much into any type of, no matter what camera it is, I've never liked the internals because I find them to be less than accurate. I much more prefer my Sekonic light meter. And even now with these smartphones, you can download apps, either free or $1.99, and you can get the same thing. Instead of, my light meter was $230, you can get them now for $1.99 as a smartphone app. So I would, if I were you, I wouldn't even worry about the internal light meters to these cameras, okay? Cold shoe. So some of these cameras have cold shoes. It looks like the hot shoe of a camera, but it's not live. There's really it doesn't transmit anything, right? So my point is so some of these cameras from the FlexRed on, they have the cold shoe so that you can put a Pocket Wizard or something like that, and you can actually use Pocket Wizards with the newer cameras, okay? There's the mount, the cold shoe is built in. But all of these, starting at this is a 1959, my Rolly 3.5F, made in 59, but it has the sync port, a cable sync port where you can use strobe photography. And I'll show you how it works. Excuse me one second. So let me show you how it works. You take your strobe, and I have a short jumper here, okay? But in actuality, you'd have a 15 or 20-foot piece of cable running to your strobe, of course, right? So I'm going to run this to my sync port, plug it in. I'm going to cock the shutter on my camera, turn on my strobe, let it warm up for a second. Then you'll see when I fire the shutter, you see the strobe fired. So even cameras, older cameras, going back to 1959, Richard Avedon, when he was in his studio, he was using strobe photography, of course, right? And he was using the sync port, which is what I'm using now. So all these cameras, these 5 cameras, have a PC sync port where you just run it to your strobe and you're good to go. You can use it with modern strobe photography, okay? Okay, next is the lens hood. So we covered lens hoods, so I would recommend, so there's 3 things you have to be wary of with TLRs, okay? So number 1 is lens flare, because I was telling you earlier, the coatings are either very primitive or there are no coatings at all on the older cameras, and you get flare very easily and you blow out your image. The image is really blown out. So you can get these lens hoods, and obviously they would go on the bottom. The bottom lens is because the bottom lens is the taking lens. The second thing we've already covered, which is the patina of the focus screen. They get very milky and they get old and you can't see through them. And the third, it's really weird. It's kind of like light leaks. Okay, so some of these cameras, they can be susceptible to light leaks because over the years, not only does the focus screens kind of patina, but the seals start to go around the doors. Okay, the door where you load your film. This material starts to degrade a little bit, and you can get light leaks into the camera. So a lot of times you'll see almost all these cameras, they come with this leather carrying case, right? So it's meant to be worn around your neck. And so that leather is not only a carrying case, but the leather protects the back of the camera from light leaks. So if the back of the camera is enveloped with this leather case, the leather is acting as a barrier to the ambient light from entering the camera. So I found I don't take pictures in bright daylight. Number 1, they're ruined. You know, if you take a picture in midday, it's all washed out. So in daylight, I only take it in the early morning or late evening, or the rest is indoor photography. And you might want to follow that same guideline especially with TLRs, because if you take a TLR out in midday, and if you do not have the leather carrying case, there's a strong chance you might have a light leak in your images. You'll see the light leak in your final image. Okay, so definitely I would recommend you not take these out in the intense part of midday. Again, early morning you're okay, late evening you're okay, but protect the body of the camera from direct sunlight. Try to make sure that the direct sunlight is not just pounding on your camera, because you're inviting a light leak with these older bodies. Okay. Films, again, it's 120. So I have here 50 speed, 50 ASA, black and white, Ilford Pan F. Here's a Kodak 400 Tri-X, 400 ASA. Kodak's Portra, this is color film 160. And this is designed for portraiture. That's why it's called Portra, because of skin tones. This is not a very vivid or saturated film like a Fuji Velvia. This is not like that because you want natural skin tones. Whereas the Kodak Ektra, this is the Ektra ASA 100. And this is a little more vibrant, or a little more saturated. And again, it might, you can get portraits out of it. But again, Portra is more suited for portraiture. And again, there's a beautiful, I'm on Fort Bliss, Texas, in Army Post, and there's a beautiful they have new trains. The engines are all fairly new, and they're the most beautiful red and yellow and black, these U.S. Army locomotive engines. And I shot them with this Ektar 100, and they absolutely came out brilliant. The images are absolutely beautiful with this Ektar. It's a beautifully vibrant. And that's what separates this from a drugstore film. So say this, you can go like 35 millimeter. You go to the drugstore and it's generally going to be a Fuji film, right? They used to be called Superia, but now it doesn't have any name. It's just Fujifilm drugstore film, right? So you buy it and it's either 200, 400, or 800 ASA, right? That's generally the 3 speeds they come in. And you get it back from the processing, and you find you're kind of unimpressed with, now Fuji makes great stuff, don't get me wrong, but the drugstore film, it's not vibrant. That's why you can get 4 or 5 rolls for $10. It's very, very cheap. Whereas when you get into this stuff, it's almost $10 per roll instead of $10 for 4 rolls. But when you get the results back from the lab, you'll see why it's $10 per roll for these top-end films. When you get into serious films, because when you get it back, the colors are just bursting and the images are just absolutely gorgeous from high-end films. This is what separates professional films from consumer grade films. Drugstore is consumer, like your Walgreens or your Rite Aid, your CVS, or so forth and so on. That's consumer film, and this is pro film. Okay, so next is, now we'll talk about the rollies. Let's get into the rollies a little bit, and this is what I was talking about, your replacement screens. And the good thing about rollies is they're serviceable. And there's a gentleman, Harry Fleener, is a living legend in the industry. Fleenor, Fleener. And he has a shop called Oceanside Camera Repair. It's in Manhattan Beach, California. So if you get a Rolly and it's older and your shutter's starting to go, if you need a replacement screen and you don't want to do it yourself. So here's how it works with Harry. You send him the camera, because I already made contact with him about 3 or 4 months ago. You put, like, you know, a note in the right, say who you are and what you want done, like a general inspection. So you package it really nicely, protect it with bubble wrap. You send it to him and he'll open the box and inspect it immediately. I mean, you know, soon. And what he'll do, he'll give it a surface inspection and basically tell you what you need. And you can either agree to the price or not. You can say yes, do the services at the stated price, or just no, wrap it back up and send it back to me, okay? And I'll just pay your inspection fee. But he'll give you that like very soon. But if you want the work done, he'll say, great, okay, I'll do the work. But he's generally, when I reached out to him 3 or 4 months ago, he had a 3 or 4 month waiting list. He said, you're not going to get your camera back for about 3 or 4 months, because that's how backlogged I am on my Rollies. So just be aware that if you do get a Rollie and you send it to him, expect to wait 3 or 4 months before he can service your camera and get it back to you, okay? But again, that's really not bad in the grand scheme of things, because you probably have a digital camera. You can continue to do photography, 35mm SLR, but you're going to have to wait on your Rollie, okay? And the second thing I'd like to talk about is this. Again, this is flame war bait for the bulletin boards, is the type of lens. So you can either get the Zeiss or the Schneider, and the top end, or if it's Zeiss, it's planar. If it's Schneider, it's Zenitar. And the lower, the little bit lower, I mean, they're still great lenses, don't get me wrong, but Zeiss is Tessar, and the Schneider is a Zenar. So it's like this quadrant, 4 lenses, 2 different manufacturers, top tier, a little bit lower tier. And again, you can get into some serious flame wars on the internet. I don't engage in that. You know how I am, even with my comments on my videos. All 4 lenses are going to take spectacular images. No matter which 4 you get, which of the 4, you can't go wrong. You're going to get beautiful images. So I would encourage you, don't go on the internet and engage in these crazy, ridiculous flame wars about which lens is on the camera. Okay, it's non-productive and it's not going to get you anywhere. The same amount of time you spent in that flame war, you could have been out taking beautiful pictures. Okay. Okay, so we talked about the ages of the cameras. And this, we got to cover price, so I'll tell you what I paid. I don't mind telling you what I paid for these cameras. The most affordable was the Flexorette. $97 I paid for this Sunday. All these cameras I got on eBay. This was like 97 bucks, okay? And it takes wonderful images, okay, for $100. Next one was the Graflex 22, which was $150. But this camera is absolutely mint. I mean, all these cameras are near mint. The only one that's even remotely a little bit dirty is the Flexorette. It shows signs of a little bit, very slight signs of wear, but the other 5 are like mint, like they just came from the factory. And this Graflex is like that, but I paid $150 for it. Okay, it's a $150 camera, but it's showroom new. Okay, next, Tide are the Yashica Matte 124G, $350, and the Rolly Cord is $350. Was $350. Both of these take superb, beautiful images. Next is the Mamiya C220F, $375. A little bit more than these two, only by $25. The images are spectacular, and the lenses, these are coated, beautifully coated, and these are interchangeable. This is the only camera that has interchangeable lenses. There's a little bracket. There's a little bracket here. You can take it off and put telephoto, wide. It's interchangeable lenses, $375, and it was showroom new, pristine. Okay, $375. And then lastly was the Rolly 3.5F, and it was $1,200. So out of all the purchases, this is probably the only one I kind of regret. It's the top end, but here's I'll cover this real briefly. You have shooter and then you have collector. Okay, so your camera hit the 20-minute mark and went into auto shut off. So I'm going to wrap this up here. The $1,200 I paid for the Rolly 3.5F was basically too much. If you add all these other 5 cameras up, it came to about $1,300, and this one alone was $1,200. So I paid too much for this camera for the value. So let's just two more things to cover before we wrap it up. So, when it comes to value, the best, the three were the Rolly Cord, the Yashica Mat 124G, and the Mamiya. The images are absolutely brilliant. $350, $350, $375. So that's the sweet spot if you're out there shopping for a good TLR that you want to start exploring film, medium format. $350 is the sweet spot. I regret this purchase. Because it's not a collector, all right? So it's not like I can sit on it for 10, 15, 20 years and flip it, and then it'll be, so much more because it was the 2.8F, right? It's not, it's the 3.5F, so this is a shooter. So it's not going to retain its value as the 2.8F would. So I ended up with a very expensive shooter that is, again, there's very little value in this camera. So I would stay away from this 3.5F. Again, the Rolly Cord or the Rolleiflex T or the Rolleiflex MX EVS, these are all shooters, and they're much more affordably priced than the higher end version. Okay. And lastly, the very last thing is I'd like to talk about my favorite camera, and it's this Rolly Cord. And here's why. The provenance that came with this camera was pretty overwhelming. So here's what happened. The gentleman who bought this, I got all the original paperwork with this camera. The gentleman bought it in 59, 60, 61, something like that. I don't remember, but it was either very late 50s or very early 60s, and the camera was like $99 brand new. But for the 1960, $100 was a lot of money. It was a considerable sum of money, and the gentleman had to buy it on the installment plan. So it was kind of neat that he loved the camera so much he bought it on installments. So he was a photographer for Paramount. He did a lot of things. He's a visual artist, but one of his gigs was a photographer for Paramount Studios, and not the LA or Hollywood branch. He did it in the New York branch for Paramount. So he actually used this camera to shoot celebrities, movie stars, right, actors and actresses, and so forth in New York. And he went on film locations and shot on film locations with this camera. So this camera actually shot celebrities and movie stars. So it's legit. I mean, it's got a strong provenance. And I investigated the guy because his name is on the receipt. And I investigated him. I shouldn't say investigated. I researched it. And it was all legit. So anyways, he passed away in 2012. And that's how I acquired the camera. He passed away in 2012. His family put it up in part of his estate sale, right? It's part of the estate and went up for sale. And I picked this up for $350. And this guy owned this camera for 50 years. He bought it, let's say, in 61. He died in 2012. 70, 80, 90, 01. Right, so that's about 50. He had 50, 51, 52 years he owned this camera and kept it in. I mean, I can look at it. I'm looking at it right now, and it's like brand new. And he used this for 50 years because he babied it, and it meant something to him. And that's why this camera has a lot of sentimental value to me because it meant so much to him. So I consider myself the custodian now of his baby. To me, this is still his baby. I'm just taking care of it, right? I have become the custodian of his baby, and that's why it has special meaning to me, and that's why I do continue to like baby the camera and take care of it because it meant so much to him. Never met the guy, never, you know what I'm saying? But I respect what he did so much. He kept all the original paperwork, the original sales receipt, owner's manual, his little installment plans that he would make. He'd get the receipts back. I mean, everything he kept with this camera. So, I mean, this is how much this camera meant to this guy. And this is what's even more sweet. It wasn't a 2.8F or a 3.5F. This guy bought this Rolly Cord, which was not the top of the line at the time. It was seen as a lower level camera, like an entry level camera. But yet he didn't care. He didn't put any value into this status symbol. And just let me digress just for a moment, because I think this is very critical to the discussion. An acquaintance, a guy I know in the Philippines, he started in photography, boudoir and glamour photography in 2009. D90. He's got an APS-C. He had an APS-C Nikon D90. He started shooting women, boudoir and glamour, lingerie, right, and nudes. 2009, he was nationally published. He had became like a sensation, a very well-respected, nationally published photographer in 3 years in the Philippines with a D90 and just a, like a $200 lens. He was using like a 50-1.8 or 35-1.8 APS-C. And this is what I kind of lament the fact that we in the Western world, in the United States especially, we put way too much emphasis on gear. That's how we kind of feel each other out. One of the first things is, like, if you're in a group, one of the very first things we do is we ping each other for gear, right? What kind of gear are you using? And we kind of size each other up by what gear we use. So if you're using some certain equipment, and it's wrong. Understand this. I'm saying it is wrong. But we dismiss photographers who don't have high-end gears, like you're not in the big leagues and you're not to be taken seriously. But in other parts of the world, this guy is on top of his game. He's one of the most respected photographers in the Philippines. He's shooting a D90 from 2008, and he's got a 51.8 lens on it that costs $200. Okay, this is why, and this guy, 50 years ago, was on the same kind of mental plane as this photographer in the Philippines. He says, I'm not going to get caught up in the gear, right? I'm not going to get caught up in how expensive the gear is or the latest fads. I'm going to buy me a solid camera, and I'm going to do miracles. I'm going to make art with what I have. I'm going to make art with what I have in my possession now, not with what I wish I had in my possession. So that's the difference between these two cameras. You can make just as beautiful an image with this Rolleicord as you can with the 3.5f. It's all in your mindset, And again, I don't mean to get too philosophical or go off on too much of a digression. I'm just saying that this camera meant the world to this guy, and it was a $100 camera, right? The Rolleicord. So again, that's why whatever you have right now in your possession, cherish it, use it, make art with it, and again, above all, publish your pictures, hang them on Flickr, hang them on Instagram, so we can enjoy them, and we can share them, and we can give you kudos, and we can give you positive feedback in your comment section. Okay? So again, thank you for watching. I hope you liked this. Hope you learned something about TLRs. I encourage you to go out and buy one. If I recommend one, Rolleicord, Yashica Mat 124G, or the Mamiya C220F, or they make also a C330, and all $350, $400 solid cameras. The images are going to be spectacular, and you're going to be just fine. Thank you for watching. Okay, so this is the focus knob. I preset everything because I didn't want to fool around too much and waste a lot of time. But here's the box, like the hood. There's the screen down below the focus screen. This is the magnifier. So I'm going to bring it up, as you can basically see. Okay, so you're looking through the magnifier onto the focus screen, and this is how you pick up focus. So you just turn the knob. You just turn the focus knob until you acquire your focus. That's really all there is to it. But so you're seeing exactly what a human eye would see when you're trying to look through so that's what we were just looking through, is the magnifier, and the magnifier is looking onto the focus screen. Okay, and that's all there is to it. Thank you.